This is a story about betrayal, manipulation, and justice. About how the past can catch up with us at the most unexpected moment, and how important it is to be ready to fight back. Sara Bennett had lived for many years with the pain of loss and betrayal. Once, her own father abandoned her for his new family, and now he had returned, asking for help. But this was not just a call from the past. It was part of a scheme, an attempt to steal her rightful inheritance. What did she do? Did she surrender or fight back? Was she able to prove her case? If you listen to this story to the end, you will find out how Sara uncovered the lies, confronted those who betrayed her, and finally gained her freedom. Sara Bennett sat in her spacious office on the 23rd floor of one of New York's skyscrapers. As a leading financial analyst at a major company, she was accustomed to strict schedules, client negotiations, and constant control over finances. Her life was meticulously planned, no surprises, only precise steps toward new professional heights. The office was spacious, with panoramic windows overlooking the bustling yet mesmerizing city. Light leather chairs, a perfectly organized desk, several folders with reports, and a cup of cold coffee. Everything in this place spoke of order and discipline. Sara loved her job because here, everything depended on logic, calculations, and clear decisions, unlike her past. When the phone rang, she didn't immediately pay attention. The screen displayed an unknown number. Sara frowned thoughtfully, wondering whether she should answer. Usually, she ignored calls from unknown numbers. If it was important, they would leave a voicemail. But this time, something felt different, something inexplicably unsettling about this call. She reached for the phone and, before realizing her action, pressed the green button. "Hello," she said, her voice steady and confident as always. Silence hung on the other end of the line. A long pause, filled only with the sound of breathing. Then a voice spoke, one she hadn't heard in 15 years. A voice that evoked both anger and pain. "Sara, it's your father, Paul Bennett." The world seemed to freeze. A tightness formed in her chest, and the air in the room suddenly felt heavy. She involuntarily tightened her grip on the phone, feeling a wave of memories rush over her. 15 years had passed since she last heard this voice. 15 years since he left, abandoning her for his new wife, Julia. All this time, she had trained herself not to think about him, not to remember. But with just the mention of his name, the past came crashing back, knocking the breath out of her. "What do you want?" Her voice was ice cold. "Sara, I need help. I'm in serious trouble." Her father's voice carried desperation, which only fueled her irritation. She remained silent for a long time, struggling to suppress the urge to end the call immediately. He wasn't calling to apologize, not to say he missed her. No, he needed something. As always, "Where have you been all these years? Why are you calling now? I understand that I have no right to ask. But please, we need help." Paul's voice wavered. "We?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Julia is with you too?" A brief pause followed. "Yes." His answer sounded guilty. Sara closed her eyes tightly. It wasn't even surprising. Of course, he hadn't made this decision on his own. Of course, Julia was behind it. The manipulator who had first stolen her father, and now, apparently, had lost some financial battle and decided to use her. Her fingers dug into the armrest of her chair as she took a deep breath. "I can't help you," she finally said. "Sara, wait," Paul began, but she had already pressed end call. She sat motionless for a long time, staring at the phone screen. Her heart was pounding too fast. He was back in her life again, but this time, she was no longer the helpless girl who could just be abandoned. This time, everything would be different. After the call, Sara couldn't focus on work. Thoughts swirled around the past and memories flooded in waves. She got up from her chair and walked to the window, gazing at the distant city lights. An inner voice told her that this call was just the beginning of something unpleasant. When she was 10 years old, life seemed simple and happy. She remembered their cozy home in the suburbs of Boston, the morning smell of her mother's pancakes, and her father's soft voice telling bedtime stories. Her mother, Lauren, was the embodiment of warmth and care. She always knew what to say to comfort her, always supported her, even in the smallest things. But then everything collapsed. A car accident took Lauren away in an instant. In one day, Sara lost her mother, and her father lost his wife. The first weeks after the tragedy were foggy, filled with tears and emptiness. Her father was shattered. He spoke rarely and withdrew into himself. Sara felt like he was looking through her as if she didn't exist anymore. Then everything changed. 6 months later, Julia appeared in their home. A tall, well-groomed woman with cold eyes. She quickly took the place of her mother, but not as a caring wife or a gentle stepmother. She became the mistress of the house, dictating her own rules. At first, she seemed kind, even caring. She brought Sara gifts, smiled, promised that everything would be fine. But behind this kindness lurked cruelty. A few months later, her true face became evident. Sara's clothes were mysteriously ruined, her favorite toys went missing, and her schoolwork mysteriously disappeared. She tried to talk to her father about it, but he only sighed tiredly. "Sara, don't exaggerate. Julia just wants the best for you." But Sara saw the truth. She felt Julia's cold gaze, her victorious smirks when her father wasn't looking. Julia didn't want to replace her mother. She wanted to erase her entirely. She became more cautious, learning to notice the slightest changes in Julia's mood. Sometimes Julia looked at her with open contempt, but the moment her father was near, her expression changed instantly. Sara felt like a prisoner in her own home, constantly on guard. One evening, when her father left for a night shift, Julia walked into Sara's room, sat on the edge of her bed, and smiled. "Do you think that if you make a sad face, your daddy will stop loving me?" she whispered with feigned tenderness. Sara didn't answer. She clenched the blanket in her fists, trying not to show fear. "You're too stupid to understand that you've lost," Julia continued. "Daddy will never believe you, so it's better for you to accept it." After that conversation, fear settled deep inside her. She realized that from now on, she could only rely on herself. One morning, she woke up to find her favorite teddy bear missing. She searched the entire house but found nothing. A few days later, she saw it in the garbage bin, torn apart. Julia watched her reaction with a satisfied smirk. "Poor Teddy," she drawled with mock sympathy. "Maybe you threw it away yourself." Sara clenched her lips and turned away. She knew this was a war, and Julia would go to the end. Over the years, the abuse only escalated. Julia controlled her every move, interfered with her school achievements, and manipulated situations so that Sara was punished for things she didn't do. When Sara won her first major school award, her father didn't even attend the ceremony. Julia convinced him that she just wanted attention. But the worst came when Sara graduated high school. Her father, completely under Julia's influence, told her he wouldn't pay for her education. "You need to learn to manage on your own," he said, repeating his wife's words. That was the moment Sara finally decided to leave. She found a job, rented a tiny room, and never looked back. There was nothing left for her in that house but pain and disappointment. And now, 15 years later, he was back in her life. Sara took a deep breath and turned to her desk. She knew this call wasn't random, and now she needed to find out what they were really after. After a sleepless night filled with anxious thoughts and resurfaced memories, Sara decided to meet with her father. She understood that he wouldn't have called without reason. There was something bigger behind this, and if she wanted to stay in control, she needed to find out exactly what. She arranged to meet at a cafe in downtown Manhattan, arriving early to secure a seat with the best view of the entrance. In moments like these, her analytical mind helped. She approached the meeting like a business negotiation, one where she needed to determine who held the upper hand. Soon the cafe door opened, and Paul walked in. Julia followed closely behind. They looked different from how she remembered them. Paul had aged, his hair had thinned, and his once confident gaze was now filled with unease. Julia. She still looked well-groomed, but there was something different about her, perhaps a slight nervousness betraying her lack of confidence. Sara took note of that. It meant they were truly desperate. Sara, Paul started, nodding cautiously as he sat down. Julia took a seat beside him, her smile forced. "Dad?" she replied coldly, completely ignoring Julia. An awkward silence settled. Paul adjusted his sleeves uneasily. "I'm glad you came," he finally said. "We're in serious trouble." "And you thought I would save you?" Sara cut in, narrowing her eyes. Julia let out a nervous chuckle. "Sara, let's not be hostile. We're here to talk," she said. "After everything that happened, you expect me to be kind." Sara scoffed. "Fine. Talk. What do you need?" Paul exhaled heavily, glancing at his wife before looking back at Sara. "We're in debt. A lot of debt. The house is at risk of foreclosure. We were hoping for some help." His voice was weak. Sara barely contained a laugh. "You came to me for money," she stated flatly. Paul averted his gaze. Julia leaned in slightly, her voice soft, almost affectionate. "Sara, we know a lot has happened between us, but we're family. Can you really just watch your father lose everything?" Sara felt anger boiling inside her. This was the same manipulation from her childhood. But she wasn't that girl anymore. "Everything," she repeated. "You mean the house? The one Julia always liked to run? Or do you mean her talent for handling money suddenly failed her?" Julia's face darkened, but she quickly regained her composure. "It's more complicated than you think," she said tightly. "The bank has filed a lawsuit. We need time to fix it." "A lawsuit?" Sara raised an eyebrow. "So it's even worse than you're letting on." Paul clenched his hands into fists. "Yes," he admitted. "If we don't find a solution, we'll be evicted. We have nowhere else to go." Sara studied him. She saw the fear in his eyes. But it wasn't fear for her, not even for family. It was the fear of a man who knew he had backed himself into a corner. "So now you have nowhere to go?" she repeated slowly. "Ironic. Because once, you left me with nowhere to go." Paul flinched. Julia, sensing the conversation slipping away, tried one last move. "Sara, we know you have money," she said in a quieter tone. "You're successful. You can afford to help." Sara smirked. "And I also have a memory. And you know what's amazing? I remember exactly how you threw me away. Now it's my turn to say no." If you've listened this far, I want to thank you. Please support this channel. Subscribe right now, give a like, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new stories. This really helps promote the video on YouTube, and it would mean the world to me to keep creating even more exciting stories for you. And coming up next, even more intrigue, unexpected twists, and a finale you definitely won't want to miss. After that meeting, Sara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her father's and Julia's pleas for help didn't seem genuine. There was something else they weren't telling her. She knew better than to take their words at face value. If Julia was involved, then deception was inevitable. Deciding not to sit idle, she reached out to a trusted private investigator, Marcus Hale. They had worked together in the past, and he had a reputation for uncovering secrets people wanted to keep buried. "Are you sure you want to dig into this?" Marcus asked when she explained the situation. "Sometimes it's better to leave the past where it belongs." "I need to know the truth, Marcus. These people are pathological liars. I don't trust a word they say." "All right," he sighed. "Give me a couple of days. I'll find out what's really going on." Sara nodded and hung up. Now, all she could do was wait. 2 days later, Marcus called back, his voice laced with intrigue. "Sara, you need to see this. I'm sending you the files, but the situation is worse than you thought. Julia tried to manipulate your grandmother's will. They already filed a lawsuit to declare it invalid." Sara's heart pounded. She grabbed her laptop and quickly opened the documents he had sent. Her eyes scanned through pages of falsified records, forged signatures, and fake financial transactions. This wasn't just financial trouble. This was outright fraud. They had been planning to steal her inheritance. Sara clenched her jaw. Now everything made sense. This wasn't a plea for help. It was a calculated move to manipulate her while they worked behind her back. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. They thought they could outsmart her. that she would pity them and let them win. "You all right?" Marcus asked cautiously. "I'm furious," she said through gritted teeth. "Not only did they try to steal what's rightfully mine, but they thought I was stupid enough not to notice. What's your plan?" She straightened her posture, determination setting in. "I'm going to fight back." Sara had no intention of letting this go. Learning that Julia and her father had attempted to strip her of her rightful inheritance ignited a fire inside her. Did they truly think she would just give up? That they could corner her with their cheap manipulations? They had underestimated her for too long. The first thing she did was meet with her lawyer, Rachel Connors, one of the best attorneys specializing in estate cases. "I knew those two were capable of a lot," Sara said, placing the documents on Rachel's desk. "But this is criminal." Rachel skimmed through the papers, then let out a small huff, shaking her head. "This isn't just criminal, Sara. This is attempted fraud on a large scale. Forging documents, falsifying financial transactions. They were hoping you wouldn't notice." Sara clenched her fists. "They were hoping I'd believe their lies. But I need your help, Rachel. We need to stop them before it's too late." Rachel nodded. "All right. The first step is filing an official complaint about document forgery. I'll also submit a request to freeze their assets so they can't continue financing this scam." Sara exhaled sharply, her determination only strengthening. A few days later, the first updates came in. The court accepted the claim, and Paul and Julia found themselves in a difficult situation. Their attempt to have the will invalidated was blocked, and their financial transactions were put under scrutiny. This meant they could no longer manipulate funds freely. But Sara knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. The next day, her phone rang again. She looked at the screen. An unknown number. Something told her this would be interesting. "Hello," she answered. "Sara, we need to talk," her father's voice came through. "This has gone too far." She smirked. "Oh, now you think it's gone too far? Because to me, it seems like you and Julia went too far the moment you decided to commit fraud. Listen, I never wanted it to turn out like this. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" she scoffed. "A mistake is forgetting something at the grocery store, forging documents and trying to steal my inheritance. That's a crime." Paul was silent. Then, after a moment, he said, "We can come to an agreement." Sara frowned. "An agreement? What kind of agreement? You drop the case and we all walk away from this clean. Nobody loses. We don't want a war." She laughed bitterly. "You already started a war, and now you have to deal with the consequences." She ended the call. The battle had just begun. The legal proceedings started sooner than Sara had expected. Rachel worked quickly, filing all the necessary motions, gathering evidence, and enlisting experts to confirm the forgery. The legal system didn't take kindly to fraudsters, but Sara knew her opponents wouldn't go down without a fight. When Sara entered the courtroom, she spotted Paul and Julia sitting together. Paul looked exhausted, worry etched into his features, while Julia maintained her usual poised demeanor. However, there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She wasn't as confident as before, and that meant only one thing: she knew she was losing control. The trial began with the lawyers' opening statements. Rachel laid out the facts, presented the forged documents, financial records, and expert testimonies that proved the fraud. Then, she delivered the finishing blow, exposing Julia's history of previous inheritance scams. The revelation sent murmurs through the courtroom, even causing the judge to raise an eyebrow. Paul and Julia's lawyer tried to spin the case in a different direction, claiming that Sara was simply being vindictive and trying to paint her own father as a criminal. But Rachel was prepared. "Your Honor," Rachel said firmly, flipping through the documents, "the evidence speaks for itself. Julia Bennett has a long history of manipulating legal loopholes for financial gain. This court must ensure my client's rights are protected." The judge studied the documents before turning his gaze to Julia. "Mrs. Bennett, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Julia rose to her feet, her voice still holding on to that last thread of arrogance. "These accusations are baseless. I had nothing to do with any forgery." But then Rachel played her final card. She called a surprise witness. One of Julia's former associates, a man who had once been her husband, came forward to testify. He detailed how she had orchestrated similar frauds in the past, proving that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. Paul, sitting next to Julia, looked completely crushed. Sara watched his hands tremble as he realized the full weight of what he had become a part of. After the testimony, the judge called for a recess to review the evidence. Sara stepped outside the courtroom, taking a deep breath. She was close to winning. Paul and Julia's lies were unraveling before everyone's eyes. When the session resumed, the judge delivered his initial ruling. Julia's assets would be frozen, her financial dealings investigated, and Sara's grandmother's will was upheld as valid. Sara felt the corners of her lips curve slightly. Julia was livid, but for the first time in years, Sara no longer felt like a victim. The battle wasn't entirely over, but she had won the most important fight. The trial was coming to an end. Paul and Julia had lost. Their attempt to steal Sara's inheritance had crumbled before them. Julia, who had always carried herself with confidence, now looked shaken. Her lawyers had abandoned their defense, and the judge had ordered further investigations into her financial dealings. This was the end of her schemes. Paul looked utterly defeated. He sat in the courtroom with his head lowered, not even attempting to meet Sara's gaze. He had lost more than just the case. He had lost his last chance at maintaining a relationship with his daughter. Sara watched him, but she felt no anger, no resentment, only emptiness. He had made his choices long ago, and those choices had led him here. After the final hearing, Sara walked out of the courthouse, inhaling the crisp air. She felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of the past was finally gone. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer that abandoned little girl who had been cast aside. As she descended the courthouse steps, Paul called after her, "Sara." His voice was hoarse and tired. She stopped but didn't turn around. A heavy silence stretched between them. "I'm sorry," he finally said. Sara let out a soft chuckle. "Sorry?" she echoed. "Are you sorry you got caught, or sorry that you chose her over me?" Paul remained silent. He knew there was no answer that would satisfy her. I never thought it would go this far," he muttered. Sara finally turned to face him, looking directly into his weary eyes. "That's the difference between us," she said quietly. "You never think." "I always do." Paul lowered his head. He understood now. He hadn't just lost the trial. He had lost his daughter for good. There was nothing more to say. He turned and slowly walked away. Sara watched him go, but she felt no sadness. He had left her life long ago, and now it was simply official. A few days later, she sat in her new home. It wasn't her childhood home, nor was it her grandmother's house, but it was hers. A place where she could finally start anew, without fear or lingering ghosts from the past. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Rachel. "Congratulations. It's over. You're free now." Sara smiled. Yes, now she truly was free. And so, this story comes to an end. A story about betrayal, deception, and justice. Sara made her choice and proved that the past does not define our future. But what would you have done in her place? Do you think Sara made the right decision? Or should she have acted differently? Let's discuss it in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new exciting stories. And of course, share your thoughts in the comments. Which character did you find the most interesting? And who frustrated you the most? Let's talk about it. Thank you for staying with me until the end. See you next time.